Hey, welcome back to the NOTCAST. Although I'm sure none of you have been in bated breath waiting for the latest update. It is number 314 today, 29th of August 2023. As the title goes, I am talking about one of my favourite film directors today, and yes, it's going to be a ranking. Well, that's not a surprise, is it, really? The director is Terrence Malick, and here's a fistful of DVDs and Blu-rays of his fine work. He's made I think 9, 10, 11 films. I can't remember exactly how many. I think it's 10, and some of them are very bad, or more correctly, some of them are not good, and some of them are incredible. So let's go in and find out, shall we? Okay, I'm presenting them to you here in largely chronological order, but obviously that's not quite how I'm going to be ranking them. So we have, I think this is 1973, that's Badlands. 1978, Days of Heaven. 1998, The Thin Red Line. 2004's The New World. 2011's The Tree of Life. 2012, To the Wonder. 2015's Knight of Cups. 2016's Voyage of Time. 2017's Song to Song, and because a Blu-ray of it hasn't been released in the UK, I'm also going to mention where is it now, the 2019 movie, which is called, hang on a second, let me just get the thing up on my screen, The Hidden Life. So there we go, that's where we're going. Let's go in and do it. So starting off, Terrence Malick is a director who perhaps has a bit of a reputation, I think it's fair to say. Firstly, the reputation is he makes great movies, and mostly that is deserved. More than half of his films are undoubtedly masterpieces that I think very, very highly of. The other half are ones where I think style has triumphed over substance, but I will kind of explainify why that is as I go through. Now, if I start off with my my least favourite, then that's going to sound very, very bitchy indeed. It's not actually meant to be quite like that, but of course, if you do a ranking, you have to go in reverse order. You can't go with your favourite as your first one, because otherwise you're going to spend the whole time just going, this one, incredible, and then by the end you go, oh, it's dog shit, and no one's going to enjoy that. So we're going to go in reverse order here. So reverse order, my least favourite of his films is Song to Song from 2017. So this is, in my opinion, quite indulgent. What we found, certainly with a lot of his films, and there's a big gap, which I'm going to talk about in his filmmaking between 1978 and 1998. With his films, he started towards the latter part of his career doing films where actually start and end points within scenes were kind of defined, and then the cast improvised their way through the story and the dialogue and the actions and the blocking, and it was shot very in a cinema verite fashion. So very difficult, I think, really to tell a cohesive story. So sometimes some films are very, very tightly scripted. The ad libs are very, very clear. Or more clearly, they're not used. But the script is very tightly scripted, very precise, very finely honed. With a number of his later films, Song to Song, Knight of Cups, to an extent, To the Wonder. These are films which don't have tight scripts. These are films that have start and end points within scenes. They have ideas and themes that the scenes are meant to explore. And then the script is kind of written in front of the camera and then created in the editing room. And sometimes that has a spontaneity to it that absolutely works and gives the film a kind of life and a brevity that really, really works. Sometimes, as is obvious, it doesn't. And Song to Song is not a narratively compelling film. Now, this film tells the story of Ryan Reynolds. No, not Ryan Reynolds. Ryan Gosling. Sorry, Ryan. Too many Ryans. Ryan Gosling and Rooney Mara as a songwriting couple trying to forge their way in the Austin music scene, and their relationship grows complicated when they fall, oh, that was a shocker, wasn't it, into the orbit of a big shot producer, Michael Fassbender, and his muse, Natalie Portman. So, how does it work? Well, the simple answer is I don't really remember very much about this film at all. I genuinely don't. It has some great in-concert footage, including the footage from the last performance by the classic Raw Power kind of lineup, or the Raw Power touring lineup of the Stooges from the last show that Ron Ashton performed. And it has some really interesting music scenes in it. What it's trying to tell, the story it's trying to tell, kind of revisiting some of the themes from a film which Terrence Malick never got to direct, which was a film which he was kind of quite focused on, called The Moviegoer, which in 1983 he had written a script for, which he didn't get to realise, which is about how a man connects with art and film and the moving image, and that's the way in which he makes sense of his life. So Song to Song is a film that kind of picks that up from a musical perspective, revisits some of the themes from The Moviegoer, I think, but it doesn't do so entirely successfully. The narrative kind of drifts in and out. It's very haphazard. There's no real sense of a story being told. There's just events that are unfolding in front of you on the screen. And what's interesting is these aren't really films. Song to Song and Night of Cups are definitely not really films in the way in which you would understand them to be films. It's more like art. You're more like watching an art installation that happens to be being portrayed at your local cineplex. But, and there's a but to it, what it does do is it kind of tells a story about how music connects to people, about how people connect to music and to art, and how they use that as their kind of map through life, or their template through life. But what it doesn't do is it doesn't tell a story. There's no sense of the standard kind of narrative tricks around stasis, crisis, and resolution. There's no kind of hero's journey. There's no evolution as such. It's just a bunch of stuff that happens. And Song to Song, like Night of Cups, has all the hallmarks of a Terrence Malick film from a stylistic perspective. So long, dreamy kind of languid shots of not very much. A voiceover that kind of asks more questions than it answers, but doesn't really go anywhere. And what it doesn't do is it doesn't resolve. So actually, when the film comes to an ending, there's kind of like an element of going, was that it? Was that a film? Did it finish? Because it's kind of like the film didn't really finish. There wasn't really an ending. There wasn't really a closure. So this, while it says on the back, it's a vibrant and alluring exploration into music, love, and the turbulent Texas rock and roll scene. It isn't really that at all, truth be told. I didn't find it compelling. I didn't find it enlightening. What I found was that it showed you all the stylistic tricks of Terrence Malick, the voiceovers, the moments of pause and reflection, the questions, the navel gazing. But what it didn't do was it wasn't leading to anything. Always reminds me, actually, this film always reminds me of Floyd, played by Brad Pitt from True Romance, who is basically just stoned the whole time and doesn't really understand what's going on, because it doesn't give you any answers, it doesn't give you any resolution. It just kind of just sits there and kind of goes, wow, life's a thing, man. Yeah, life is a thing, man, indeed. Next one, I'm going to put this at number 9 on my list, 2015's Night of Cups. Christian Bale, Cate Blanchett, and Natalie Portman. So the guy's got some, repeat cast members which are appearing in his movies. This is follows a similar kind of approach. It's got start and end points at the start and end of each scene. The cast kind of improvise their way through what's happening, but there's not really a narrative that's being told. There's no learning, there's no journey, there's no lessons which the character has learned as such. It's just a bunch of stuff that happens. Now, the back of it, and I'll read the back of it, is about a screenwriter living in Los Angeles whose, while successful in his career, his life feels empty. Haunted and confused, he finds temporary solace in the decadent Hollywood excess that defines his existence, etc. Basically, it's a tale of everyone he's ever slept with in an impressionistic sludge that is borderline sexist. It objectifies women. It doesn't treat them as fully rounded characters with their own ideas. Maybe it's telling it from the point of view and the perspective of the narrator, Rick. But instead what it does is it just ends up seeming like a sexist conveyor belt of everyone he's ever slept with and his recollections of them, with lots of vaguely pervy, vaguely sexy kind of stuff that really is put into shade by the work of Spankbank and Pornhub. It's style over substance. Again, it has that it almost verges on self-parody. So the long language shots that pause on landscapes and nature and animals, the voiceover that goes, "What am I? Who am I? What is this? Where is heaven? What time is love?" Those type of things, and you kind of go, "Well, what's going on really?" And it feels a little bit, from an artistic perspective, like it's stagnating into an impressionistic, semi-forgotten memory. It's fractured. It's kind of exploring the idea of, well, what is memory and what does that mean? And our memory is important, and do people remember the same things and all that type of stuff, but with a couple of sidelines of threesomes in there, and a bit of what looks to be pretty much narrative misogyny and objectification. Not a great film. Sorry, Knight of Cups, absolutely not. If you think, oh, Terrence Malick, fantastic filmmaker, where do I start? Don't start with Song to Song or Knight of Cups. Absolutely do not start there. Go somewhere else, please. Heaven help us. 2012, this is number 8 on the list, is To the Wonder, starring Batfleck, Olga Kurylenko, whose name I've never pronounced before, Rachel McAdams, and Javier Bardem. This is a film that kind of comes straight off the bounce from the year it came out, the year after Tree of Life. It's a beautiful and acclaimed latest offering from Terrence Malick. It's centered on Neil, a man who is torn between two loves: Marina, the European woman who comes to the United States, and Jane, the old flame he reconnects with from his hometown. His doubts about his life and loves are reflected in a crisis of faith experienced by Father Quintana, Javier Bardem from Skyfall. So, what do we have here? Well, I like it, but it's one of those films that's very male-centric, very geared around the male gaze, the male problem. Oh, too many women love me. Oh, what am I going to do? Oh, I'm torn between that woman and that woman. Oh, it's awful, isn't it? Well, or as Henry Rollins said, "Dear guy who sleeps with too many women, fuck you, single Henry." It's like, really? It's a change of mechanism in the way in which Malick was presenting his films. So this, again, start and end points for scenes. It was improvised. The cast were in place. It was all style, no substance. It's a film made of lingering moments and feelings, cutting from the action to the prelude and the aftermath. So what you don't see is, you don't see the stuff which you're meant to be seeing. You're seeing the moment before, the moment after, that type of thing. And Michael Sheen's character was in it, but he was removed completely in the edit. So, which draws me on to something which actually I find quite frustrating about a number of films, full stop, is all the stuff that's shot that never makes it, that you never see. So, for example, Full Metal Jacket had a completely different lead character, and the heart, who in the end I think turns up and says nothing in the actual movie in one version of the film. For example, Thin Red Line, again, there was a lead that was, I think, oh, what's his name? It was meant to be the lead in it. Let me quickly check. Oh, the chap that was in Predators, Adrian Brody, who ends up saying only 5 lines in the whole movie, was originally meant to be a fully realised lead with a start, a beginning, an end, character development, and so on. Doesn't happen. I'd love to see that film. I really, really would. And again, with To the Wonder, what you have is a film where the story as such is being improvised. Now, you can argue it's very lifelike because life is being improvised. We're all making up life as we go along on a minute to minute, day by day, hour by hour basis. We're all improvising our way through this thing called life. It's a mighty long thing called life, and let me tell you, I'm here for something else. It's the afterlife, which of course gets touched upon in another film. But To the Wonder is more cohesive. But I think after Knight of Cups and after Song to Song, Malick kind of probably realised that there was a law of diminishing returns. Is that if you hope that you're going to hit the dartboard and you don't have any plans to do so, and you're making it up in front of the camera, sometimes, no matter what you want, you can't mould genius out of raw materials that don't contain at least the nuggets of it. And again, the editing periods for these things, To the Wonder was quite short. Knight of Cups was only 3 years after To the Wonder. Song to Song was only 2 years after Knight of Cups. You kind of figure, well, what story are you actually telling? Why are you making this film? What's the plan? What's the vision? What are you trying to communicate around reality and ideas and concepts? And what are you trying to explain? And if you kind of go, well, I went looking in the river of life and I tried to find gold and I couldn't find it, and I thought it was going to be all right, but then it wasn't. And I was making this shit up as I was going along. And it's like, you need a plan. You can't, like, for example, although you could argue everything is being made up as it goes along, you don't try and find the plot to the movie in the edit suite and on the shooting set. You have to have an idea around what you're going to say and how you're going to say it and what imagery you're going to bring in. And this is why some of the Kubrick films, I think, have lasted far, far longer and have had a bigger cultural impact than the Terrence Malick movies, is because, for example, in the Kubrick movie, the symbolism is defined down to, well, if it's a red colour, it means betrayal. If it's a telephone, it means a lack of communication. If it's a red telephone, then instead of it being the red bat phone from Batman, it actually means that there's an issue about miscommunication causing betrayal and deception within the concept of, and Terrence Malick wouldn't have that. It would not be in there. It'd be like, well, I'll just use the phone. And it just doesn't have that underlying layer of artistry around it in those three particular films. Everything else is done very, very good, more tightly structured, better, stronger, harder, faster. But those three films, not great at all. So number seven on my list is 2016's Voyage of Time. This was only released on DVD in Europe, or more correctly, in Germany. It might have come out in America, I don't know, but the only version I could find was the German DVD of Voyage of Time. And Voyage of Time, I could tell you what it is. It's Terrence Malick's first documentary film about something, and it's yeah, man, I don't even know what that means, but there you go. So what we have for Voyage of Time is effectively a 90-minute documentary of the history of mankind told through recreations in CGI of major, weird and unusual historical events, going all the way from things like dinosaurs and all the way through to the present day. Now, something like Koenigsegg, Baraka, Nagoya-Katsi, Power-Katsi, all that type of stuff has a slightly different approach, which is set in contemporary footage to try and describe what that footage is, and try and use a collage to try and create an overall impression of what life and reality could be. Voyage of Time travels through time in the way that, say, 2001 does, but nobody has ever really done anything quite like Voyage of Time before, which is effectively trying to create a fake documentary, which isn't really fake, that covers the entire of human history and the history of the planet from the moment of birth to death, kind of detailing the life cycle of both a life and the life of a planet. And that's why it's called Voyage of Time. Voyage of Time, by the way, apparently may have been constructed out of extra scenes and shots that were originally prepared for Tree of Life but weren't used in the final edit, that were then formed into their own film. And Voyage of Time is also, as I understand it, has been subject to a court case around non-production of the footage, and there was a few $1 million that were paid to Terrence Malick in order to produce the film, and when nothing was forthcoming, the producers then decided to take him to court and see if they could get the money back. In the end, irrespective of all other things, we got this film. I think Voyage of Time is really good, but it's not a narrative film at all. It's non-narrative, historical nature epic, and it kind of tells the story of life on the planet through not random, but very carefully chosen snapshots of events that are happening on the planet at any given point in time, sometimes going back to the time of the dinosaurs, I think, and then sometimes right up to the current day. It's really interesting. It's something that you should really see, or should be projected at an art museum instead of a cinema. It is the very definition of an art film. I think it's really good. It's not by any stretch of the imagination a straightforward film at all, which brings us to number 6. Number 6 is, as I've mentioned before, 2019's A Hidden Life. I really like A Hidden Life. It was the first film where Malick went back to using narrative to tell his story. And I saw this film in the cinema in probably December 2019. It was only on for a week. It was been and gone. I don't think it's had a disc release in the UK. I think it's available on streaming. I'm not quite sure. I did try and look at importing a Blu-ray, but couldn't find an affordable copy of it. It was about £30-40. But A Hidden Life is absolutely fantastic. I really, really rate it. It's the story of a conscientious objector in the Second World War, and it's got some really interesting ideas and themes and motifs around identity and agency and control and self-dominion, and how far are you prepared to go to maintain the control over yourself and your own life and the things that you do versus the role that you have inside a wider society. It is epic in every sense of the word. It's heartbreaking. It's absolutely brilliant. I love it to bits. It seems to have just disappeared off the face of the planet and is not very well known at all, but I'm a huge fan of A Hidden Life. I think it's very, very good indeed. I rate it very, very highly. It's certainly, when you get to A Hidden Life, we're most definitely into the realm of Terrence Malick making masterpieces. This is exactly where he is. So film 6.5 or 5.5, depending on your point of view. This is a Terrence Malick film that isn't. It was a film that he was working on in the 80s and the 90s, but for some reason financing and scheduling failed to make it happen. So in the end, I think Terrence Malick took up a producer's role in it, and he had written a script for a version of it. This is Steven Soderbergh's Shay, starring Benicio del Toro. If this is a Terrence Malick movie, this would definitely be number 5 in my list. It's a very good film. It's a very limited historical epic in its scope, but again takes some of the themes which we were talking about in A Hidden Life, the ones around agency, control, identity, self-determination, all the stuff on Maslow's hierarchy of needs, and is very clearly about that. If you're thinking, oh, he's probably never going to make another movie, what shall I watch? Well, Shay is pretty close to a Terrence Malick movie in feel and in pedigree, so worth a watch. But for me, actually, number 5, the good old-fashioned number 5, is Days of Heaven, with Richard Gere, Brookie Adams, Sam Shepard, and Linda Manns, whoever she is. And this is a film it took me quite some time to find. So I only found a copy of this a couple of months ago, actually, Days of Heaven. It's, in my opinion, a really interesting film, again, around some of the themes which you're starting to see as common themes which Malick is revisiting. It's around a person who's trapped, and a person that has, through a series of circumstances, find himself having to take a complete left turn in his life and going in a different direction. John Travolta was originally planned to star in this film, but he'd signed a contract for a film called Welcome Back, Kotter, or a TV show of the same name, and so he wasn't able to fulfill that. So Richard Gere moved into that post and became the lead in the film. It's a really good film, and I think it's the first one of Malick's films that really has nature itself as a character. So in almost all of his films, there are three main characters. The first, obviously, is the humans. The second one is the narrative, the story that's being told. It doesn't always happen in some of the films, like Song to Song, Night of Cups, and To the Wonder, but don't tell anyone I said that. And then the third character in almost all of his films is nature itself, the planet, the world, the landscape that people exist in, and how they work with it. Now, Days of Heaven has a relatively slender plot where Richard Gere becomes a fugitive, and he has to kind of start himself anew in the fields of Texas. And so it's got that kind of sense of watching the world go by and seeing nature as actually this huge, unknowable force that you can't really either battle or defeat, but you have to exist with. And it takes that and it runs with it. I think it's really good. When you had, after Badlands, this came out, and you kind of, we're dealing with a really capable, great director who sadly didn't make a film for 20 years after this. The reason he didn't make a film like this is he had 7 or 8 projects which he worked on, very few of which came to fruition. So, for example, Shay was the only one of those 7 or 8 films that he worked on that really kind of came to life. He had a film called Q, which he was working on, which in another form eventually became Tree of Life. He had a film called Sancho the Bailiff, which was due to be made in 1990, potentially as a stage play, but ultimately just couldn't get the financing to happen. In 1992, he worked on a script for a film called The English Speaker, which was based upon a book called Studies in Hysteria, and tracked a lot of the same kind of theories as Cronenberg's Dangerous Methods. And he described it as The Exorcist, as written by Dostoevsky. So I'm really interested to have seen what The English Speaker would have been, but we never got to see it. And A Dangerous Method by Cronenberg was probably the nearest thing to that. We then had an Elephant Man project, which was cancelled because David Lynch made The Elephant Man. I'm going to return back to that later on. And then in 1983, we had The Moviegoer, which kind of some of the themes were picked up into a thing called Song to Song, which I've mentioned before. There was also a script which he wrote for Desert Rose, which was effectively work for hire. He didn't put his heart and soul into it, so it didn't really happen. And so in 1998, we got The Thin Red Line, which is coming up shortly. But number 4 on my list of movies is The New World, starring Colin Farrell, Christopher Plummer, Christian Bale. And this is kind of like a story of, well, how do you want to describe it? A spellbinding tale of the Jamestown settlement, of cultures connecting and of deadly consequences when connections fray. This takes some of the Pocahontas myths and legends and kind of tells them from a slightly different angle, that of the Conqueror. And it comes in 2 forms, by the way. So there's an extended cut, which is available on DVD. Here it is. And then also there's the standard version, which is also available on DVD. I've put both the standard and the director's cut inside here. Both are very, very good, very strong films that kind of, again, talk about man's connection to nature, man's connection to himself, the things that he feels he has to be from an intellectual or a political point of view, and the spiritual connection that one has with the reality that exists around you. So there are always 2, like when people say, oh, there are 2 worms inside you. Well, both of my worms are perpetually knackered and want a nap. But in the new world, the 2 worms that are inside you, one is connected to nature and the world and the ground beneath your feet, and the other one is connected to the world of politics and power and money and civilization and identity. And it's a really fascinating film about the war that exists between those 2 different separate parts of one person's identity. Very, very good. I recommend the director's cut more than the standard version. The director's cut is longer. You can't have enough Terrence Malick in a movie. The longer the film, the better it is in almost every instance, I think it's fair to say. Number 4 on the list, and this comes in 1998, is The Thin Red Line. Now, The Thin Red Line, his first film for 20 years. And it was has a 5-hour original version of it that exists. And this is where I was talking, for example, about Michael Sheen being cut out of Knight of Cups or To the Wonder, where you kind of think, I want to see the rest of the film, because the bits that we saw were so good. I'd like to see what else we didn't get to see. You could make another film out of the leftover parts of The Thin Red Line, and that would be 2.25 hours long. And so, for example, Mickey Rourke, who has, I think, 5 or 6 lines in the cinematic version of The Thin Red Line, he's heartbroken. He says some of the best work that he ever did is on the cutting room floor of The Thin Red Line. And you can see in the scenes which are on the deleted scenes on the Criterion version of The Thin Red Line, and I think there's some deleted scenes on this as well, is that you can see in that work and go, oh, there's something really brilliant there, but you never get to see it. You get to see fractions of it. You never get to see the story as it could have been. So, for example, also actors that were deleted from the cinema from the final cut of the movie: Lucas Haas, Bill Pullman. Aidan Brodery's role was reduced from a lead to 2 lines, even though he's second on the poster. And I think The Thin Red Line is fantastic. It is an ensemble piece. It is basically, these days it would be like a Netflix, Disney, HBO 8-hour TV epic saga, whereas at that point, that format didn't really exist, so it was reduced to a 2 3/4 hour movie epic. And it tells the story of a hauntingly realistic view of military and mortal chaos in the Pacific during World War II. Now, it was nominated for 7 Academy Awards, including Best Picture and Best Director. It's apparently an unparalleled cinematic masterpiece. What I will say is, the bits of it that we get to see are phenomenally good. But what it is, it's a film that is massively overstuffed by the cast. Just reading out the names that we've got on here: Sean Penn, Adrian Bodie, Jim Caviezel, Ben Chaplin, George Clooney, John Cusack, Woody Harrelson, Elias Koteas, Nick Nolte, John C. Reilly, and also you get John Travolta in there as well. And for example, I think George Clooney gets 2 scenes, John Travolta I think gets a scene, Nick Nolte gets maybe 3, 4. Yeah, Woody Harrelson gets in. It's kind of like, well, something like Platoon or Hamburger Hill or Full Metal Jacket, but 10 years too late. If it had come out in 1987, I think people would have been like, oh my God, what an incredible war movie this is. But it wasn't that. What you end up with a film that feels like it's incomplete. So watching it, storylines get dropped, characters disappear, you don't get resolution to certain plot lines that are added. And that's where I think The Thin Red Line perhaps falls down to number 3 on my list of Terrence Malick films, because it just doesn't resolve everything. I want to see the 5-hour version. It may be atrocious, but I'd like to find out for myself. And I'm just, yeah, I love every minute of The Thin Red Line, but at the same point, I'm aware that I'm watching a truncated version of something which probably could have been absolutely phenomenal in much the same way as that's the feeling I get when I watch Event Horizon. So we're down to the last 2, and there's only 2 Terrence Malick films to go, or is there? But number 2 is, well, actually, if I tell you what number 2, you're going to know what number 1 is. So let's go through both of them. Number 2, Badlands. Number 1, Tree of Life. So Badlands, starting Martin Sheen and, by the look of it, Sissy Spacek in 1973, is kind of like a precursor to films, hugely influential on Quentin Tarantino. So Badlands is about the 2 star-crossed lovers that go on a rip-roaring rampage of revenge and wanton destruction. That's not strictly how it says on here. But as they kind of journey across the American wastelands, having done some murders and found themselves in deeper shit than they ever planned to be in. And so Badlands, hugely influential on things like Natural Born Killers, True Romance, California with a K, those type of films. Has that kind of like American road trip stroke serial killer movie. Also, I think probably influenced by Bonnie and Clyde with Warren Beatty, which is the same kind of story about these 2 people as they kind of travel across America, and they leave a trail of death and destruction in their wake. And once you've seen Badlands, you can see the huge cultural footprint it's got upon everything else. It has these beautiful vistas of the American countryside, where it becomes a character in itself seen through the window of the vehicle. And you kind of go, as a human, you know, if you, let's say you're on the run from the law, hopefully that never happens to me, but if you're, let's say you're a fugitive from justice, and you're traveling across America, what you kind of think is, wouldn't it be lovely to just disappear into the land and to just be a person, and to not have to be bound by things like, you know, taxes and pension plans, and you know, being chased by the police because you've accidentally done a few murders, those type of things. And I think that's the land that or the area that Badlands really kind of leaps into. Fabulous film. I think very, very highly of it. It's again, touches upon all the themes that sit inside a lot of his movies, around identity, agency, control, dominion, how much of what is happening is a pure motive versus being influenced by something else. Really, really interesting ideas. And it all wraps it up. It's very, very confident first film. As far as debut films go, it's up there with Citizen Kane, and well, definitely better than Fear and Desire, I'll put it that way. But it's very, very good indeed, which means my number one Terrence Malick movie, I know none of you care about this, but I'm telling you anyway, is Tree of Life. This is the Criterion edition. Tree of Life comes in two forms, the theatrical cut and the extended cut of Tree of Life. It's an enormous narrative which cuts across what feels to me, decades and lifespans and generations, and it kind of touches upon the life of one particular character, an awestruck child in Texas in the 1950s, as he learns to navigate the extremes of nature and grace, represented by his bitter, often tyrannical father, Brad Pitt, and a nurturing mother, alongside the adult version of him as played by Sean Penn. And it's got a really interesting kind of approach to going through time, which is thematic and kind of touches upon when you see events experienced as a child and events experienced 30, 40 years later by the same character when they're on the other side of the child father. When they're on the other side of the child father dynamic. And it says it's a rapturous vision here, which it is. It's probably the nearest thing that Malick gets to exploring and articulating the glory and the wonder and the sense of utter humility that a human being can have. There are times when I kind of realise that when I'm sat here, I'm sat on a ball of rock floating through space 93 million miles away from an enormous ball of fire. And in the time between me starting this sentence and ending it, we've travelled 30,000 miles, and I'm held onto this planet just by the power and the force of that movement. If the Earth stopped spinning, the water would fly off into space, and gravity would cease to have all meaning, and eventually would be sucked off into the outer space, and none of what we've achieved or anything would ever really matter. And in the 8 minutes that it takes from the light to reach the Earth to it coming here, for example, a lot can happen in that 8 minutes, and within a month, if that sun went out, we'd all be dead. And then you kind of feel very, very, very small indeed, and you also feel like you're inside the total perspective vortex from the Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. And Zaphod's just this guy, obviously Zaphod went in and was like, yeah, I am the center of the universe. But for most people, there's a sense of humbling about, I'm just this ghost driving a meat skeleton, going through life, doing the things that I do. And Tree of Life kind of, with those 2 or 3 kind of narratives that run through and cut across time and thematically link up across the generations, tells an enormous narrative that almost tells the whole of human history. And it ties in with that as well, because it's not just the story that's being told by the people, but it's the story that's being told by the planet. And this is where I think some of the footage that later appears in Voyage of Time was originally prepared, and this is where the Tree of Life and Voyage of Time, I think, are brother and sister in terms of how they work, is that this tells the story from the Earth's perspective. Tree of Life tells the story from the perspective of humans experiencing it. As the pupil becomes the master, the son becomes the father, the child becomes the man. Those type of things. It's really great at it, and I strongly, strongly recommend it. If you're into arty films and feeling meaningful about the state of the universe, Tree of Life is Malick's masterpiece. It's an incredible movie. I absolutely love it to bits. Now, there is one film that, were it directed by Malick, I think I would have made it my number one, and it wasn't, because in the spirit of simultaneous discovery, the spirit of Deep Impact and Armageddon happening at the same time, we had some work that Malick put in the late 70s towards a project, The Elephant Man, which was cancelled when David Lynch made his film of The Elephant Man in 1980, starring John Gielgud, Anthony Hopkins, and John Hurt. And there is nothing I can say about The Elephant Man that I haven't already said in my David Lynch episode. This is one of my favourite films of all time. The last few minutes of this film are the only time where I think Lynch really kind of grapples with that sense of wonder and enormity of life on planet Earth, which has become a central underpinning kind of theme which applies to all of Malick's films, which is that idea around agency and control and motive and identity and the relationship between man and the planet and everything that goes with it. I love The Elephant Man. It's one of my favourite films of all time. I cannot say enough good things about it. It's just really bloody brilliant. Had Malick directed a film with The Elephant Man, it undoubtedly would have been my number one, but since he didn't, and was never made, you can watch David Lynch's version and kind of think, oh, I wonder what Terrence Malick's version would have been like. We will, of course, always wonder. So that is my rundown of the 10 Terrence Malick movies and the ranking of them. And I look forward to another one when it comes to the multiplex near me shortly. Right, aside from that, obviously, thanks for making it 40 minutes into this and hearing me talk about a film director you may never have heard of before. If you're thinking, where do I start? Probably start with Thin Red Line or Badlands. And then if you like the kind of more esoteric, thinky, feely, navel-gazy part of it, go for Tree of Life. If you're more into the narrative element of it, Days of Heaven and The New World are probably the best places to go. The film, which I think is massively, massively underrated in his body of work, is A Hidden Life. I cannot recommend that enough. Hardly anybody's heard of it. Even fewer people have seen it. And it's really difficult to get hold of on disc, yeah, at least in the UK. So if you see a copy, let me know, bung it my way, and I will reward you handsomely in chalk ices and strawberries. So that is about it. Thanks for watching. Take care of yourselves and each other. Stay beautiful. If you've enjoyed this episode, that's great. So have I. Don't forget to subscribe, where I'll be talking about ancient pop groups and bad records made when I had all the hair on the top of my head and not on the bottom. Is my main stock in trade. So see you all soon, and adios amigos. All right, bye.